So what are we talking about here? Give me some examples. Pines. What else has a cone? All evergreens. Yeah, but that's a really generic term. Pine, spruce, fir, right? There you go. Cedars. So those are all examples of gymnosperms. They have a cone, and their seed is naked on the cone. It's just naked right there under one of those shingles. You ever looked at a cone? If a cone looks like this, hooked onto a tree, when you look at it closely, you'll notice it's made up of a lot of little shingles, isn't it? You ever notice that? The way it's all made up of shingles. And they're really tight when that seed is developing, but when it's time for the seed to leave, these little shingles will flare out, won't they? You ever seen a pine cone with the shingles kind of flared, and the seed falls out? So if the shingle is tight, that means that you're still making it. And when it flares out, that means it's time to go. Now what happens is the egg is in here. The sperm has to come and wiggle its way into the egg. And so when the shingles are really tight, there's a little tube that the sperm has to land and travel into the egg. So the sperm is floating through the air and it comes and lands and goes into the egg. The zygote then, when it's ready to go out on its own, then these shingles flare out and the zygote falls out. Okay? But it's naked. I mean, there's no protection on that at all.
Like when you see the regular pine cone like on the ground,
if the cone has fallen on the ground, typically it's already flared, the seed's out, and so it drops off. Most cones have a 2-year cycle. Year 1, the cone is built and the egg is produced, and then year 2, the egg is fertilized and it flares open and drops out. So almost every cone will be able to treat for 2 years.
So that egg stays alive for that?
Well, actually the egg itself, meiosis, doesn't actually happen until right before fertilization. But the ovary and all that stuff does. You have to gear up and make the ovary. If you think about it, ladies were born with ovaries, right? And they've been developing since birth or even before birth. And you don't use them until puberty. Look at how many years those ovaries are kind of developing before you use them. A cone has 1 year to grow an ovary and to make it functional. Because year 2, you use it and you drop off. So it's really quick, fast. So you can look at a cone and tell if it's year 1 or year 2. Year 1, they're still really tight, small, they're almost green looking even. Year 2 is when they start to dry out and they flare, and you know that they've dropped their seeds. Okay. There's male cones. This would be called a female cone, and then the male cone is usually really small. And it's the same way. It's a 2-year cone, and all it does is produce sperm. And the sperm leaves this cone and goes out, and hopefully will land on the female cone and go up in there. Some trees have both. Some trees only have one or the other. So some trees are male trees, some trees are female trees, some trees have both male and female cones. My guess is probably most of the trees in the valley are dioecious, they have both cones. You've never seen a male cone probably. They're tiny. So when you look at a pine tree, you see a nice big cone on it. If that tree has both, look again. And you might see just a little tiny cone up there somewhere. Oh, there's a male cone. But they're so small that you usually don't see them. Right? Yeah, so that's the naked kind of way of doing it. An angiosperm is a covered seed, and it's covered because it is the product of a flower. So these are the flowering plants. All plants that produce a flower are in the angiosperm category. And pine tree is kind of a classic example there for this. All right, what are some examples of flowering trees? Or flowering plants, I should say. Pick your favorite, right? I mean, most of the plants that you think of are actually in this category. Have a flower. And so it could be anything that has a fruit. And a fruit can be anything from an oak tree to grass to a rose to watermelon. How's that for a diverse group of plants there? All of those produce flowers, which means their seed is going to be covered. And we're going to do a reproductive unit later where we'll look at that flower You may know already the parts of a flower, but if this is the main pistil of the flower, down here is the ovary. And in here is where you're going to make that egg. And then typically they have stamen that come up around the side, and here's where the sperm are made. The sperm are released, and they may stick up there, then they have to tunnel down and fertilize the. So this is all covered, this is all protected. Not only that, once you have a zygote formed, it's not on its own, is it? Let's say this is on an apple tree, the flower on an apple tree. Right here is where the stem will be, and this will turn into a what? This is going to struggle because it's upside down. What is that? Well, tell me you don't know. I mean, you can tell me you don't know. So this right here is going to develop into an apple, right? And inside the very middle of the apple is where you find the what? That's where the seeds are, yeah. It's more like a squashed pear. But yeah, and here's where the seeds are, because that's exactly where the ovary was, isn't it? Okay? Now, gravity will pull this thing down, so it hangs down, so then it'll look like that's a lot, not even much. So that's a whole different process, isn't it, than this process? Okay? So that's why we call these angiosperms, because the seeds are protected and they're located inside of a fruit. But now, what that obviously means is that watermelon that you eat is a fruit. Okay? That means that all of your green beans and cucumbers are fruits. Oak trees produce little fruits. What's that saying? It says, intelligence tells you that beans and all this stuff are really fruit, but how does it go? Intelligence tells you that beans and something and something and something are really fruits. Somehow you're smart, but you're only smart if you know not to put them in a fruit salad. I'm not figuring out. We misuse the word fruit, don't we? We think of fruit as being like apples and peaches and pears. That's true, but so are green beans and cucumbers and all that other stuff. Okay? Now, one more category. These are divided into two major groups. And this is the last one. I'm going to put those two groups up here simply because we're out of space. So, coming in from, and this here would be the angiosperms. Coming in from the angiosperms are two more groups, and these groups are called a monocotyledon. And that actually might be spelled right. And this other category is a dicotyledon. The scientific names are monocotyledon or ACE or something, it's really the Latin name of it. But this is good. Monocotyledon and dicotyledon. Now, you may have heard of these terms before, but we abbreviate them as simply monocot and dicot. You ever heard those? Monocots and dicots. Obviously, mono means one and di means two. So then what is a cotyledon? You know what a cotyledon is, then you know what a plant has one or two of, right? Well, let me tell you examples and see if you can tell me what a cotyledon is. An example of a monocotyledon would be grass and all the grains, corn, wheat, barley. They're all monocotyledons. An example of a dicotyledon would be beans, peanuts, kind of the obvious here, acorns. So acorns would be oak trees. So I'm kind of, you know the difference between corn and a bean that you eat? Or peas. We oftentimes think of peas like this.
Multiple fruits are produced.
No, but that's not a bad guess.
It's grass over there and over there.
Grass is here. These are all these here are all examples of angiosperms. And then these are divided up into monocots and dicots.
Oh, those are.
Yeah, and then grasses are monocotyledon angiosperms.
Multiple zygotes.
No. Think about eating a piece of corn to eating a pea. Let me draw it for you. A kernel of corn looks like this. Little dents in the top, don't they? Is that what a kernel of corn looks like? Humor me, okay, folks? It may have like a little dent in it or something. What does a pea look like? It's round, but then it has, it's in two pieces, isn't it? Split pea soup. You ever had a lima bean come apart on you? Peanuts, oh, peanuts, the classic, they fall apart, don't they? So the difference is dicotyledons have two, what we call seed leaves. Monocotyledon has one seed leaf. And this seed leaf, this cotyledon, is pure starch. It's the food packet that the plant puts around the seed to give it something to eat while it leaves mama and goes out into the big world. Corn kernels you can't split open, can you? That's one packet of energy. So that's why we call corn a monocot. It has one packet of starch. Dicotyledons, there's two packets of starch for the one embryo. There's the embryo, here's the embryo. A lima bean might be a good example. A lima bean. You know, a lima bean has a little bump at the top. You ever seen that? That's where the embryo is, right there. This is pure starch right here. That's why we eat it, because we like the starch of it. This starch, but this lima bean will actually pop into two halves. Two cotyledons. And if you let this thing grow, the roots will start to grow down, and the stem will start to grow up, and it'll get little leaves on it. It comes out of here. This is the embryo. And it will suck these cotyledons dry. This is the starch. It's like a packed lunch. So there are two different examples, two different types of angiosperms, monocotyledons and dicotyledons. Now, there are a lot of differences between these plants, more than just having one cotyledon or two. Let me give you some other examples of differences. Let's look at the leaves. How do the leaves differ between monocots and dicots? Can you think it out? How does grass and corn look different to you than beans and oak trees leaves? Can you picture that in your head?